what's up?
Now just recording a podcast. What's up with you?
Oh, not too much. You know what, though?
What?
You need a counselor.
Thanks, so do you.
I do need a counselor. You're right. So welcome back to You Need a Counselor. This is episode 8. We have a really awesome guest today that we're super excited to have you hear from and learn from. But my name is Julie Johnson. I am president and founder of Heart and Solutions Counseling Agency here in Iowa. We are offering telehealth sessions still due to COVID-19. We are also offering in-office and in-home sessions as well for mental health counseling and behavioral health counseling. And we're here to tell you why you need a counselor.
And I'm Krissa. I am the vice president at Heart and Solutions. So I am in charge of the behavioral health department where we work with kids with behavioral health issues. And this is You Need a Counselor. So the mission of our podcast is that we are a podcast designed for people curious about counseling, but who have barriers keeping them from experiencing the benefits of counseling. Our mission is to share stories about counseling, good, bad, and indifferent, and spread the message that everyone can benefit from mental health and behavioral health counseling services.
So if that's you, if you're on the fence, keep us on, please. If in the first 7 episodes we haven't convinced you yet, here comes number 8.
We're going to keep trying.
We're going to keep trying. We will get you eventually. Okay, so we do post on Sunday nights, so we encourage you to save up your laundry. This is a great reason to not do laundry throughout the week, so who doesn't want that excuse? I love that. Because if it's Tuesday, I don't need to do laundry because I need to put away all my laundry on Sunday night while I listen to a podcast. So we're here for you guys. We're here for that. So we post on Sunday nights, 5 p.m., so put us on when you're batching your laundry tasks. We'd also love to join you for your Monday morning commute to work, which for a lot of people is a very short commute, but even if that means put us on between the bedroom and the office, that's okay with me. Put us on when you're drinking your smoothie. We are good with that. We'd love to talk to you guys on Monday morning too. That gives you the entire week when all the counseling agencies are open to message, call in, find a counselor, and call in and schedule that appointment. Or if you've got a counselor that you haven't seen in a while or talked to in a while, we'd love to have you call in. That gives you 5 whole days to do that. So today we are very, very excited to introduce Adrienne MacIain, or Adrienne MacIain, as she is known. She is the Dr. Adrienne MacIain is a PhD. She's the author of Melting Ivory, which is a very interesting looking book available on Amazon. I have a lot of questions after seeing this book, and Krissa already decided she's going to get it.
Yes.
So we will have some follow-up questions, I think, after we read it. And then also, you're the host of That's Allowed podcast, and also I saw that you've got a blog there as well, and it sounds like just a really great way for people to share their stories that they might not otherwise share or have a platform to share. So I just love that work that you're doing, and I would love to hear more about that. So welcome.
Thank you so much.
Wow.
Yeah, I call myself the story whisperer because I am here to help people tell their stories. I feel like a story that is trapped inside of us can color everything we do and everything we see in ways that we're not even aware of. And so if you can get that story outside of yourself and just look at it as a narrative, not only is that empowering for you to not have it taking up space and kind of controlling you from the inside, but it can be a beacon of hope and inspiration to other people who may be going through something similar. And so you have to remember that everything that happens for you, not to you. And so when you look at that story and see where you are now in comparison with it, it can be really empowering. So that's what I'm here to do, is just help people get those stories out, find their core message, and get that out to the people who really need to hear it.
I love that. And I love that it's the story whisperer instead of like the people whisperer. Because it really, it's like this idea that, you know, the stories need encouragement too. So it's not just the person who is the storyteller that needs encouragement, but the story itself kind of brings on a life of its own. And the story itself can impact the person with this kind of life and energy that it's got kind of inside itself.
Yeah. And if you're not careful, it can define you. It can define your whole life. It can sort of become this, like you said, an entity unto itself that is leading you and not the other way around.
Absolutely. Do you find that a lot of people, or that sometimes it's the case with people where their identity will kind of get tied up in the narrative, and then there's just a really hard time separating those experiences out, even when they're not serving us, because it's painful, the idea of losing or, you know, giving air or giving breath to some of those things that are so personal and part of who we are.
Absolutely. I think shame keeps us silent a lot of the time. And it's that facing that shame and saying, you know, having self-compassion and recognizing that, hey, we all make mistakes, right? That's what life experience comes from. Wisdom comes from mistakes you made when you didn't have the wisdom to know any better, right? And so that's what life is all about. But it keeps us quiet a lot of the time because we're embarrassed to share these stories. And so I find it incredibly empowering to get people to share these stories and recognize that, hey, you're not alone. You're not the only one who's maybe made that choice. And you learn from that choice. You're not the same person you were when you made that choice. You don't have to let that define you anymore. Often I think people put a label on themselves. They think that they're a bad person, or they were a victim, or, you know, any number of kind of negative things that happen. Maybe they're an abuser, whatever it is that happened during that time, they kind of label themselves that way. Whereas if you can label the story that way and say, that was the behavior that occurred. Here's what I did back then. Here's what I've learned now. And here's how I've become a better person and a stronger person because of it.
Those experiences can just really overshadow all of the positive changes that we've had in our lives, or all of the experiences that are kind of contrary to that image we might have of ourselves. But because it's so big, it grows in the shadows, and it can overshadow all of those pieces of true evidence that are to the contrary.
And the thing is, often it was that catalyst that helped us change. You kind of have to hit rock bottom. You kind of have to, because we tolerate things as long as they're tolerable. And then when they become intolerable, that's when you change. And often that's when you go and seek help. And it is that help and that support that allows you to be able to change. Because people always say that which does not kill you makes you stronger. Well, that's only true if you have the right support to help you heal and then move forward. Otherwise, it weakens you and kind of gets you stuck in this little loop.
I love that analogy, because that saying always kind of bothers me, because the way that it's used, I think, in our culture makes it seem like that's kind of a passive situation, like that it will just naturally make us stronger. And the truth is that, like, it's that's an action verb. There are active steps that we can take to make sure that it makes us stronger. We can build our resiliency. We can get support to teach us how to do that, and be able to get to the place where we can share our story for the benefit of other people who are going through the same situation. It's so true that it has the potential to make us stronger, but it doesn't always. And I think that sometimes when people hear that and they go, well, that didn't make me stronger though, right? It's kind of a letdown, like, well, I thought it would. So I love that perspective of, like, there are action things that we can do. There are supports that we can get to that place, so that phrase and that saying is true.
Trauma is an opportunity for growth, but it's just that, it's potential. And if you don't do anything with that potential, then it's just trauma.
Absolutely. Yeah. I love that. Because I think that in our field, especially, we sometimes we try to put a really positive spin on trauma. We talk about post-traumatic growth, and we try to put a really positive spin on it because we want people to know that that is possible. But I think that sometimes if we don't talk about the fact that takes action, that takes work, that takes processing, and it takes talking about scary things that we don't always want to do, but that there's a road to that outcome, and that's not just the typical outcome. And so if you're not experiencing that outcome from your trauma, if you're not experiencing post-traumatic growth from your trauma, that doesn't mean that something is wrong with you. And I think that sometimes that can be the message that is taken from talk about post-traumatic growth. So I love that you're sharing about that nope, it's a process. And there is a way to that, but it's not an automatic situation.
No, and it's very difficult to do for yourself and by yourself. That's why you need a counselor.
Yeah, there you go.
So true. Oh my goodness, you are on the right podcast. So, can you tell me a little bit about your book too? Because I saw that it's a true story, and that always gets us interested, because I think that true stories are just so inspirational.
Yeah. And that's part of why it took me 20 years actually to get this book out there. And I had, it was a journal that I had kept at the time when all these crazy things were happening to me. I went to West Africa and I was there to study theater, but I ended up getting an education that I absolutely did not bargain for. There was a coup d'etat while I was there. I fell in love, and that ended up being far more dangerous than the coup d'etat. And so I ended up in this very abusive relationship, but we were so trauma bonded because of what had happened that I couldn't see it until it was, I won't say too late, because it never really was too late, but I felt like it was too late. And that's part of the message of the book, is that it isn't too late. It's never too late. But it felt that way to me. And so I really want people to know that I feel that. I understand what it feels like when you're in that situation where it seems like it's too late to change, or it's too late to get out of something that you've gotten yourself into. And that is another reason why counseling can be really helpful, is to get that perspective from someone else, to see, oh, there are other options here. I do have other choices. I'm not actually.
Yes. I love that. I love that, how your book and your podcast kind of come together, because you're helping other people do what it sounds like what you've done. So you've taken this experience, you've written your narrative, you've shared that with other people, you've helped people through it, and then you're helping other people to do the same. So I just think that's such a beautiful connection between
like I said, when I wrote this as a journal, and I wasn't expecting anyone else to read it. I did not know it was going to turn into the story that it turned into. Like, we never really know what our story's going to be until we look back. And so I needed an outside perspective. I tried to edit it, and I couldn't, because it was my life.
Yeah.
I was on the inside of it. And so I couldn't see it as a story. I just saw it as everything that had happened. And it was all kind of mushed together in my mind, and it all seemed so important, And so I needed someone to come in, and God bless this friend of mine who came in and read all of everything and said, okay, these are the people who actually needed to be in this story. Everybody else has got to go. And this is the through line of the story. Everything else has got to go. And I was like, thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So in some ways, a counselor is kind of like an editor for a story.
That's an interesting way of putting it. Yes. I think there's definite crossover. Absolutely.
It's that outside perspective, because like you said, we can't see our own story the way that another person can see our own story. You chose somebody who you had a relationship with, who was a good friend, and who you trusted with your story. And I think that's, I would imagine as a writer, it's challenging to give your story to somebody else. This was your private journal, so you'd never had anybody else read it, I would imagine. And the same can be true with counseling, right? Where we've got these stories in our head all the time. And then the same way that you were very brave and you were able to share that with your editor, we can share those stories with our counselors too. And they can give us that fresh perspective. I really love that.
And a good counselor will repeat back to you what they're hearing in a way that gives you new perspectives and new insights on it. And it's the same kind of thing where I'm saying, here's the main message that I'm hearing here. Does that resonate with you? And I think that's exactly what a good counselor does. I agree.
And kind of cutting down too, not that a counselor is going to invalidate our story by any means, but the way that your editor was able to say, okay, but these are the themes. This is the main message through all of this, because when it's our life, like you said, we get kind of caught up in the weeds, right? Like everything seems important because it all happened to us and it all kind of came together as part of this. And we know the cause and effect of like, this happened and then this happened and then this happened, but a counselor can kind of take a much higher bird's eye view perspective on it and say, yes, but now that it's all over, these are kind of the takeaways that I'm hearing from you.
And these are the patterns I'm seeing too, because it's very difficult for us to see our own repeated patterns because it all feels so different to us. It's like, well, that was a completely different relationship. But then the counselor looks at that and sees, yes, but you see how you did this in this situation in response to this kind of stimuli. And you see how you had a similar, trigger point over here and had a similar reaction. Oh yeah, I did do that. Didn't I?
Yeah, sometimes those things are, I'm sure you had situations like that come up with your editor where you were like, oh, wow, I did write that.
Oh gosh, yeah.
And
absolutely.
I have that with counseling too, where I'll say like, oh yeah, I did say that like 6 months ago. And wow, that really does connect with what I just thought about today.
So
Awesome.
I wanted to share one thing that actually happens in the book. So if you read the book, you'll see this. I had a negative experience with a counselor during this experience.
Yeah.
And the reason is because I was coming into marriage counseling with this abusive person and trying to, asking these counselors to help us get back together as a couple. And sometimes you're giving a counselor an impossible task. Sometimes you're coming in and asking for the wrong outcome. And so they just can't help you with that because that's not what's supposed to happen here.
Yeah.
Right. And so these counselors, actually, it was a funny thing. I was at graduate school and it was 2 people, a man and a woman, and they were students. And so this was, I think, their sort of practice here. And we really threw them into the deep end because I was obviously in a very bad situation. But afterward, the gal pulled me aside and she said, I know we're not supposed to say this, but I think you should leave that guy. And I knew she was taking a huge sort of professional and personal risk to do that. And again, I didn't put that in the book because it didn't quite fit in the narrative at that point, because at that point I wasn't ready to hear it and I kind of blocked it out. But she did do that. And so looking back at that, even though it had been kind of a negative experience and we never went back after that first session because it was a complete train wreck. But the fact that she took that risk and said that to me and was real with me for that moment came back to me later and was very important. And so sometimes a counselor can actually just be that thing that kind of snaps you out of it and goes, hey, I know what you asked for, but that's not what you need.
So you didn't go back after that experience? We
did not.
After she's okay. Yeah, but that part of it still sticks with you, just still resonates with you. Because sometimes with counseling, it is just the introduction of an idea. And sometimes when we are, because you are clearly a very goal-oriented person, you are clearly a very high achiever, and with high achievers and with intelligent people, like we sometimes get very focused in because we have to be, right? You've got to, in order to go to grad school, you've got to have focus, right? In order to write a book, you've got to have focus. And so that's a huge benefit to us in a lot of ways professionally. But then at the same time, it can sometimes be a little bit detrimental because we do get so focused in on what it is that we want or what it is that we visualize. And because, especially for creative people are probably the worst for this because we can visualize that outcome so clearly and we can see it.
For empaths, for optimists, for people who see the best in other people, we want to fix them and we want to help them sort of, grow into their potential, right? And I think that's what keeps a lot of people hooked into these abusive relationships, is feeling like, well, I'm the only one who understands them and I'm the only one who can help them. And guess what? You're not their counselor.
Yeah.
They didn't hire you for that.
Yeah.
And they don't even want your help, or they would be getting help from
Absolutely.
someone who's actually qualified to give it to them.
Mhm.
And so you're trying to force on them help that they didn't ask for. And that really is the problem, because if someone wants help, they have to seek it out for themselves.
Mhm.
And until they've done that, there is literally nothing you can do for them. And everything you do to try to help take their pain away is just enabling.
Did your partner at the time, was he a willing participant in the counseling sessions?
Well, good question. No, what had happened was he had left for a while, and I was relieved because I wasn't, having to be interrogated every time I come home and explain exactly where I'd been and what had been going on in, that day, and why was my hair wet, and whatever crazy thing he fixated on, right? And so I was really relieved, and he called me one night and he said, hey, I miss you. And there was a pause. And he was like, don't you miss me? And I was like, honestly, I've really been enjoying this time to myself. And that was not the right answer. And so he was on a plane faster than you can snap your fingers, heading back. And he'd been staying with my uncle, and my uncle called me 2 minutes later and said, get out of the house now. That guy is not in the right frame of mind to have a conversation, and I don't want you anywhere near him. And so I went to a neighbor's house and I hid there for about a week. And he finally, I got in touch with him via email. And I said that if he was willing to have a neutral third party sit down with us, that I would be willing to talk to him. Well, the neutral third party that he chose was a Catholic priest, and I am not Catholic. So it was a very awkward conversation.
Yes.
Yeah.
And very non-neutral.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so in that conversation, I said that I would be willing to give it another try if he was willing to go to counseling with me. And that, because of the barrel I had him over, is the only reason that he agreed to go to counseling. And so you can see it was set up to fail from the very beginning.
Sure.
And he took this as an opportunity just to sit there and tell them all of the horrible things that I had done in his estimation, and what a terrible person I was, and why it was so wrong of me to even insinuate that he needed counseling, and all of this stuff. So he's just going on, and I'm used to this by now, because I'm like, this is every day for me. It's just, you're a monster, and how could you, and how dare you, and blah, blah, blah. So I was just like waiting for my turn and kind of zoning out.
Yeah.
And then they asked me something, and I don't even know what they asked me. And honestly, I wasn't even aware of what came out of my mouth after that. And then I saw that they were staring at me with this look on their face. And I realized what I had just said, which is, it's probably better that I just die. That's what I said. And they said, in this very, obviously they had to memorize something to say in this instance, right? And so you could see them sort of the wheels started to turn of what am I supposed to say here? What's the lawyer speak that I'm supposed to say here? And they said, are you saying that you are considering harming yourself? And I said, oh no, I won't do it. He'll do it for me. And he gave this you see what I have to deal with kind of gesture, what a drama queen, am I right? And so that was when I was like, okay, he's just not going to hear me. And this isn't going to work, And so that to me was my, and when she told me, I think you should leave that guy. And I was like, oh, I can't do that. Then he'll kill me. That was when, the little wheels started to turn in my head, but I wasn't ready to face it yet. Because the thing is, when you're in you're a frog and you've just realized you're in a boiling pot of water, right? But the top looks way too far for you to jump. So you're just sitting there going, well, what's the point of my even trying to climb out of this? Like I don't have suckers on my paws, like, like flippers, whatever it is.
Right.
Mixing metaphors, but you get what I'm saying.
Yes.
Like, how am I supposed to get out of this? I better just get used to boiling water and get better at surviving in heat. And that's the mindset that you're in. And so anyone who tries to, offer you a spoon or anything to climb up out of, you're just like, no, that's not going to work. He's just going to throw me right back in again. Just leave me. I'm fine. Yeah. And it's a really sad thing when you see someone in that place. And I know that, I've seen this a lot too, where you see someone who's in that pot of boiling water and they don't see any way out. And you keep trying to offer them, here's a way to climb out, here's another option, and they're not ready. And so I just want to say to anyone who, knows of someone who they think is stuck in a situation, the best thing that you can do for that person is to empower them exactly where they're at and remind them of who they are and what they value and what they need, and that their needs matter. And just keep doing that until they get it and start realizing, hey, my needs are not getting met in this pot of boiling water. Perhaps there is a better way. And if you keep saying, hey, I've got this wooden spoon over here, I can put it in there anytime, you just let me know. One day, they will probably call you up and say, hey, where's that wooden spoon? But until they do that, there's just nothing you can do. Because again, you can't fix anybody who's not ready for fixing.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that analogy of the frog in the boiling water. And and I feel like in some ways, so if I kind of apply that to the situation we're talking about, then, so you went to this counselor kind of saying, okay, you showed them, you maybe didn't say to them, but in discussing the situation, and he very clearly showed to them that that you were in this pot of boiling water, and you went into them and you say, I'm in this pot of boiling water. I need some ice cubes.
Right. Exactly.
So that I can stay in this pot of boiling water, but I don't have to feel so hot. Right?
Yes. That's such a perfect analogy. I love it. And then when I did, of course, find a counselor just for me who was willing to kind of meet me where I was at and give me tools to help myself out of my situation, which was when I had finally left him. When I went to that person, what they told me, absolutely blew my mind, which is, I kept telling her, I just don't want to hurt him, and he's been through so much, and I'm giving him, all these excuses around why he acts the way he does and all his reasons and stuff. And she's listening to all of this and she says, it's amazing how you have so much forgiveness for him, but what about you? Can you have compassion for yourself? Can you have forgiveness for yourself? And that really blew my head open. And another thing she said was, we have to be willing to be seen as the bad guy and to know in our hearts that we are not, but to let them see us that way because that's what they need to do to make sense of this and to move on from it. And so you just have to let them see you that way and say, hey, she's being a jerk and she's being disloyal and she left me and she abandoned me. And, that's their perspective. And you don't get a vote in their perspective. You can't control how they see you. You can only control how you see yourself.
Yeah.
And that was huge for me.
That is huge. I love that. And kind of bringing that back to the narrative piece, again, part of what you do also is just separating out their narrative from your narrative, even though it's the same, it was the same date, it was the same situation, I said the same thing, they heard the same thing, but in their narrative, you might be the big bad wolf, wolf, but the important thing is that in ours, we know that we were being Little Red Riding Hood, right? Or we were the huntsman even.
Right.
In ours, even though it's the same story, so many times we base our own narrative on the narrative that we expect other people to interpret but from our actions. If I had that story in my head and I said, okay, I was being these things that he thought I was being, well, that's his story and not necessarily ours. So I love that. I think that's so important in separating those out. Did you have any experiences like that when you were writing this book, where you found pieces of his perspective coming into the narrative at all?
Yes. And it's funny because, you know, and I found other people's kind of perspectives, I think, as I was going along of how I must have looked or how it must have seemed from an outside perspective. And it's funny how we can't, you know, when you look at the same action from multiple perspectives, it can really seem like a good person doing a bad thing or a bad person doing a good thing or a villain or a hero or, you know, it really just depends on your perspective in the moment. And we all have heroic moments and we all have villainic, I don't know, villainous moments.
Yes.
You know, and everybody is a person and we're a big bag of contradictions and nobody's perfect and everybody makes mistakes. And sometimes we all mistreat each other in ways that we don't intend to because we have a really flawed bag of tools that we got from other people with flawed bags of tools who were just trying to do the best they could with what they had.
Mm-hmm.
And we just
Absolutely.
learned these kind of messed up ways of doing things. And, you know, we hurt each other sometimes. And it's not what we set out to do, you know, but there it is. And
Yeah.
so I look at even the craziest of his actions, you know, and I look back on that and I go, okay, yeah, he was nuts. And what he did was really awful. But at the same time, where does that come from for him? He was really hurt by someone to do that to someone else.
Mhm.
You know, we are all deeply flawed humans.
Absolutely.
And you can forgive someone without putting up with their behavior. You can hold someone in your heart, but not keep them in your life anymore. And that is, I think, one of the hardest lessons to learn is that sometimes the best way to love someone is to stay out of their life and to not let them hurt you anymore because it's not good for either of you.
Yeah. Absolutely. I love that because it's kind of a transition in the way that you are using your gift of empathy. Because your gift of empathy is, you know, it, when directed in a certain way, will make us take on other people's problems and will make us take on, you know, deal with things. There's put up with things that really we shouldn't have to. And but then it sounds like through your independent counselor that you saw just for you, you were able to use your strength, which is empathy, but in a whole different way. So you were able to give empathy to yourself. You were able to forgive him and forgive yourself, but keep that empathy, but put boundaries in place there
Yep.
for yourself. And so I think when we put boundaries in place, we even magnify that empathy. But I think for empaths, there's like, that feels kind of counterintuitive. And I think that there's sometimes this feeling that like, I don't want to lose this part of me, right? This is a huge part of me that I care about people and I'm a caretaker and I love people and I can see what they're going through. But you were able to forgive with boundaries there. And it sounds like in forgiving him, you were able to also forgive yourself for things that you had imagined you had done wrong. Whether you had done things wrong or not, it's all in our perspective of what we take from it. And so it sounds like that forgiveness process was huge for you.
Yeah, and you use the word boundaries. So let's talk a little bit more about how I learned the importance of boundaries,
Yes.
because that is a big thing that really changed not just my relationship with him, but all of my relationships in my entire life. And it was a process. It didn't happen overnight. But what I started to realize little by little was that, you know, I had been abused as a small child when I was 4 years old. And so that experience had taught me on a subconscious level that I was there to help other people experience pleasure and get rid of pain. and that my pleasure and my pain was irrelevant.
Mhm.
And so over the years, that had become compounded in my mind. And so this was this experience where it just went too far. My pain does matter now. It's just too much. And so then I started to realize, oh, it's actually my job to take care of myself and to keep myself safe from these things that hurt me, and to say, hey, I have these needs. I need to get those needs met. Well, then what I started to do was to recognize that I had a boundary, but to ask the other person to take care of it for me. So I would say things like, hey, that made me uncomfortable. Could you please not do that again? Right? So now what I'm doing is putting the onus on that other person to remember, hey, there's a landmine here. Please don't step on it. Rather than recognizing, hey, that's my landmine. Okay. It is my job to keep both of us safe from you stepping on that again. And so if that recurs, here's what I'm going to do. And that phrase changed everything for me. Here's what I'm going to do, because it puts me in the power position and it keeps the other person safe.
Yes.
Saying, hey, here's the consequence that's going to happen if this reoccurs for both of our sakes. Here's what I'm going to do to keep us safe. So if you say something like that again that triggers me or upsets me, I'm going to go for a walk. Or whatever it is that I'm going to do, just so the other person knows, here's how I'm going to handle this moving forward. And if it recurs again, then I'm going to move my desk over here. So, whatever it is. Whatever you think you need to do. But again, that it was a process, and it took me a long time to come to that, because it's not something that we're taught, especially as women. We are not taught how to defend our own boundaries.
Absolutely. There's so much that I love this idea, because if we grow up with the belief and the understanding of our place in the world, that we are there to care for other people or take care of other people's needs, then it makes sense that when we start to identify our own needs, that we would also expect other people to take care of those needs, right? Because the idea underneath it is that other people take care of other people's needs. So I take care of other people's needs. So of course, when I have needs, I would expect somebody else to take care of them. And so that makes so much sense. And I love that you outlined that progression, because sometimes people will start talking about boundaries in counseling, and then they'll do the thing exactly what you described. So I like to think about like going to church potlucks, right? So if you go to a potluck where there's a lot of people, and let's say I'm allergic to strawberries, right? And so I go to this potluck, and maybe I send out an email beforehand and say, I am allergic to strawberries. Nobody brings strawberries. Nobody brings strawberries to any of the get-togethers, right? Nobody brings strawberries to anything. that is putting myself, like you said, it's not keeping myself safe, because if I just go and eat whatever is there, assuming, well, I told them that I'm allergic to strawberries, so why would they put strawberries in there, right? But what you're describing, so that's kind of that next step. And then sometimes people do that step, make that step, which is an important step, but then kind of get a little bit like disappointed, right? Because like I told them, and then they still put strawberries and things. And so I love what you're talking about, that next step in your progression where you go, okay, now I am going to tell people I'm allergic, but I'm going to ask what is in the food before I take the food. And I'm also going to not eat something that says, or if I say, hey, what's in this? And they say strawberries, I'm not going to eat that, right? And so I think that, there is that progression. I love how you've outlined that in your own experience, because sometimes people can get a little discouraged in that middle step.
And also, let's say you asked someone, hey, what's in this? And they didn't tell you there were strawberries in there, even though they knew you were allergic to strawberries, and you ate a strawberry and you got really sick. Well, guess what? You might decide not to invite that person to the next potluck.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you were very clear, you took care of your boundaries, and they trampled it anyway.
Absolutely.
And when you know, as Maya Angelou says, when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time.
Absolutely. So if it was a restaurant, for example, and you go there and you tell them very clearly, and then you ask and they say no, then absolutely, it's our prerogative to say, I'm not going to go to that restaurant again, or I'm going to send that restaurant my medical bill.
Or I'm going to
for treatment.
Post negative reviews, or, you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You can defend yourself in that case because you did everything you were supposed to do to protect your own boundary, and they didn't hold up their end of the bargain.
Yeah, absolutely. And that would be, you know, if you posted a review of it, it wouldn't be for spite, right? It would be for like,
to let other people know.
Warn other people.
Yeah,
that might
exactly.
have allergies, that like, don't trust this. If you're allergic to gluten, don't go to this place, right? They mix fryers and stuff like that. So I see those all the time, those warnings, and they're helpful, you know, for other people. So, well, this has been really, really, I do have one more question that is just like burning in my brain. So what was it that allowed you, so after having that experience with couples counseling, what was it that allowed you to be open to counseling again and to find your counselor that it sounds like did really great work with you? What was it that got you there?
Well, first of all, I had been in counseling before. You know, this was not my first rodeo. And so luckily I knew that, you know, that was not the cream of the crop situation. And what I realized was that I needed to work on me, that I was trying to drag him into this counseling situation so that they would see what a jerk he was being and help me fix him. And that's always the wrong way to go into something. You know, whenever you're in a relationship with anyone, you have to be able to accept them exactly where they're at. You can't love someone for who they were or who they might be. Okay? You have to love them exactly where they're at. And if you can't, then you need to give them separation. You need to give them space to become a person that they're happy with. And if they're already happy with them and it's not working for you, great. Go find somebody else. Okay? It's not everybody is made for everybody. You know, but the bottom line is, whenever you go into a situation and you say, I'm going to change this person, right away, you're dead in the water. Never gonna work.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, I love that. So it was a transition, because the time that you went to counseling, it didn't really work. And I love that you've identified these pieces of, like, you went in with an unwilling participant, and, you know, and kind of like, we're planting these watermelon seeds, but like asking for corn, right? We're in Iowa, so that's an Iowa.
So Iowa, corn.
Yeah, that's a very Iowa way to say it. And then also, but you had enough experience with counseling previously to be able to say, hey, what I experienced in this marriage counseling session that was not helpful to me, or not helpful to me in the way that I thought it would be or wanted it to be, that's not all counseling. So I love that you were able to take the previous experiences to kind of reflect on what was different in this one and continue on, and also be able to focus on yourself in those next sessions. It's so important.
And I realized too that part of the reason that I hadn't been seeing a counselor through this whole experience, because, you know, normally I'm in therapy, like I know I need a counselor, right? So I hadn't been through all this time, and I realized it was because I was scared. I was scared to talk to somebody who was going to remind me of who I was and show me, hey, you're supposed to be out there on the outside of this pot. And I was terrified of that, because it was like, but I got myself into here, and how am I going to get myself out? And, you know, it was just too scary to face that. So I was hiding from myself, I realized. And so when I finally, you know, you'll have to read the book to see how I got out of the situation.
Yes.
But once I did, I realized, oh, I need to go to counseling. Why have I not been doing this? Obviously, this is what I needed. And man, it helped me on so many levels, in so many ways. And, you know, I won't say, again, it was a process, and there was some really messed up stuff that happened even after that, where I was doing some really, you know, I've seen this a lot, that you take on the valence of your abuser in some ways because that's what you've seen as powerful. And so I started being abusive to some other people in my life who were just trying to help me. And it took counseling to help me unpack that and see what I was doing, and to start being really authentic and truthful to myself, and to face some of the shame that I was trying to cover up with, really dangerous behaviors.
Yes, absolutely.
And, yeah.
Well, we can't wait to read the book. We're so excited because now we need to know. Like, everybody needs to know. So, and I feel like, oh my gosh, we would love to have you on for some more episodes if you are open.
Yeah.
I feel like there's a lot more to this story, and we love to hear about it. So, tell us about how we can find your book and how we can find your podcast and your blog.
Absolutely. So, for the book, you just go onto Amazon and type in Melting Ivory. Or you can type in my name, which I'm sure you'll have on the show notes.
Yes.
My website is that'sallowed, ALOUD.com. And you can find my podcast there. You can also just find my podcast on pretty much any of the pod places by typing in That's Allowed. And you can find me on Facebook. I'm there too, and on Instagram and Twitter and pretty much all the places.
Perfect. Awesome. That sounds great. Well, thank you so much for being here. This has been an awesome discussion. I feel like just from so many angles, I feel like we touched on so many really important aspects of just life and the way that we operate as people in the world. And I feel like some of the major themes have just been allowing ourselves to be human and allowing other people to be human. I feel like that's really a huge part of what you do. So I'm so grateful that you're putting that message out there in your book and putting it out there in your podcast and your blog. I'm sure that's helping so many people. So that is really, really awesome. So thank you for the work that you're doing. We appreciate it.
I am Adrienne MacIain, and I need a counselor.
Yeah, you do. And so do we.